Okay, we are now live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third speaker series that we had so far. If you recall, in the previous sessions, we learned about COVID-19, and in the previous session, we learned about cell-based meat. And today, we are going to talk about evolution, and we will be joined by our guest speaker, Muhammad Hafiz Yazid, a friend of mine, who is wildlife researcher and also currently doing his master's in natural resource management. So again, Hafiz will be uh, walking us through evolution. And just like before, we'll also have an opportunity to win prizes if you complete the quiz. The quiz will be based on today's talk by Hafiz. So make sure you watch the whole video to get hints and answers to the quiz. So let's pass it on to Hafiz, our guest speaker for today.
Okay, thank you, Aili, for introducing me. So, a very good afternoon to all of you that is present here today. So, my name is Hafiz, as Aili mentioned earlier, and I am a good friend of Aili. And I am a wildlife researcher from Malayan Rainforestation. And today, I was invited by Penang Science Cluster to give a talk on evolution for their STEM speaker series. So, we are living in a pandemic right now. I hope every one of you is in good health. So remember when it all started, we were told about this virus called the COVID-19. And fast forward to today, we are still living in the pandemic. And now we hear about a lot of different variants of this COVID-19 virus. You have your Delta, your Gamma, your Lambda. So what just happened here? Well, it has something to do with evolution. But science, most often than not, it provides an answer to a question. So what does evolution an answer to? So you might have noticed that you did not look the same as your friends. Sometimes your nose is a little bit different. You have different heights. Your skin is not the same colors. Your friends might have straight hair and your hair might be curly. And if we compare ourselves with a monkey, for example, some of our features are the same. We both have two eyes, we both have two nostrils and a mouth. And each of our hands and feet have 5 fingers. But we are not totally the same. Unfortunately, we don't have tails. And we are less furry than our monkey friend. That is why we wear clothes. And then you see a tiger. They stand on 4 legs compared to our two, and they have sharper teeth than ours. But both of us have lungs to breathe, and both of us gave birth to our children. Well, the female member of our species, that is Alice. And the differences when you compare ourselves to other species, other families such as the birds, the snakes, and the fishes, even plants and microorganisms such as bacteria and virus, the differences gets more and more. All of these differences, all of these different form of life, the minor differences we have even with our friend is what we call as biodiversity. So it is all the different things of living things. And evolution explain how all of these differences came to be. So evolution by definition is the changes in heritable characteristics of a species over time. So you might have heard comments from people when you were out with your parents. You might hear something like, "Oh, you have your mother's eyes," or that they will say, "Oh, you get that curly hair from your dad," or they might say, "You look just like your mom." So that is what heritable means. It is things that you get from your parents, like our looks. And this is passed on by a thing called a DNA. So every one of us have this DNA. It is like a recipe that contains the instructions on how to make you. And we all have two copies of them. So you get one from your mom and you get another one from your dad. So that is why you may have your mom's eyes, but your eyebrows look like your dad's. Okay, so you get two copies of this DNA that forms you. You get from one from mom and you get one from dad. But the process where this DNA are passed down to you, it is not perfect. So sometimes mistakes can happen during this process, and this is what we call as mutation. So having this mistake might cause your appearance to look neither like your mom or your dad. So evolution is the changes of all these characteristics that can be seen in the descendants of a species and their descendants and their descendants and so on. So an example that we have here, so imagine a population of black rabbits. All of them are black. And then suddenly one of them is born blue. And after a period of time, when this blue rabbit breed and have kids on its own, and their descendants have descendants, and more of the population becoming more blue, until at last everything, all of the rabbits are blue. So this is what we call as changes in heritable characteristics of a species over a period of time. So remember, individual does not evolve. It is the population that evolve. So this is what evolution is in a nutshell. So the process where the group of black rabbits changes to the blue rabbit is what we call as natural selection. So natural selection is a process where good changes are selected, and this process drives evolution. So going back to the mistakes that we mentioned earlier, so some mistakes can be good and some mistakes can be bad, or the mistakes might not have an effect at all. So here we have giraffe as an example. So people have been wondering how giraffes have long necks. So it was thought that giraffe must have an ancestor that have shorter necks. And we know that giraffe eats leaves from tall trees. So it needs to have a long neck to reach its food. So how does it obtain this long neck? So previously, some naturalists they hypothesized that the giraffe's necks grew longer as it tries to reach to taller and taller leaves. So as it reaches to taller leaves, its muscle grows and then its neck becomes longer. But we know now that mistake when transferring DNA from parents to child is what causes a species to have a different or a new trait. And this mistake might cause a species to have a good trait or a bad trait. And we have established that giraffe needs long necks to reach its food. So long neck is a good trait, and the short neck are bad traits. So giraffe with long necks, they can reach for food and they can live healthily to pass on this long neck trait to its descendants and so on. However, giraffe with short necks, they can't reach for food. Thus, they will die from starvation. So these giraffes with short necks, they won't live long enough to pass on this short neck trait to its descendant because it won't have a descendant in the first place as it dies from starvation. So we learn that mistakes give new traits. So it can be good or it can be bad. So good traits allows the animals to survive and be passed on to the offspring until the trait become more and more common in the population. So the selection of good traits and the elimination of bad traits is what we call as natural selection. And natural selection drives evolution, which is how heritable traits in a species changes over a period of time. So remember, individuals does not evolve. It is the population that evolves. So moving on. So this theory of evolution by natural selection was proposed by two men. So we have here Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. They were both naturalists. Naturalists are a scientist who studies the natural world. So both Chuck and Al sail over the world because airplanes were not yet invented then. So Darwin sailed to this group of islands called the Galapagos Island. And when he gets there, he found a species of bird that have different characteristics in different part of the islands. And the differences is most prominent in the beaks. So each of their beak is different based on the type of food that they eat. So if the bird is hard things such as nuts, it needs large beaks to crush it. And if the bird eats insects, it needs long and narrow beak so that it can reaches into holes. So it is through this example and countless others observed by both Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, who does the same thing but in Southeast Asia, that they finally proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection. So now that we have learned a bit about evolution and natural selection, as well as the background history of how um, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace introduces this theory of evolution by natural selection, let us take a look towards these two types of evolution that we are going to learn today. So we have divergent evolution and convergent evolution. So both types of evolution are driven by natural selection, which was proposed by our good friend Chuck and Al. So let's take a look at the first type of evolution. So we have divergent evolution. And as the name suggests, diverge is when one thing splits into two things or more. So divergent evolution is when one species separates into two species or more species. So we have learned previously that mistakes can happen to give rise to new traits. And if these new traits are good, it will be selected by natural selection and be more prominent in the population. But over a long period of time, many mistakes would happen that give rise to many new traits and make a species look very different from their ancestor. But it is also possible for a species to develop into two different set of traits that are both good but allows the offspring to survive in different environmental condition, allowing the species to split into two. So let's have a look at our example here. So we have the brown bear and the polar bear. So just by seeing the picture here, you know that they are related somehow because they share a lot of features together. So these two species of bear are closely related because they share a recent common ancestor. This is the same ancestor that these two species share before they diverge into two different species, which is the polar bear and the brown bear. So polar bears, they live in icy conditions. So they have developed traits that allows it to survive in icy environment. So it have white fur that provides a good height from its prey in its natural environment, which is the ice pole, the North Pole, sorry. And while the brown bear, they have longer claws than the polar bear and a bigger shoulder. This allow them to dig more efficiently in dirt. So both of these bear species, they share the same ancestor. So they were once the same species, but over time, mistakes causes them to develop separate good traits that allows them to survive in different environments. And came a time where they look more and more different than one another, diverging them into two separate species. So this is our first type of evolution, divergent evolution, where one species separates into two species or more. So this is what we like to call as the tree of life. So if you trace the recent common ancestors of living things and the recent common ancestors of those recent common ancestors, we will have a sort of tree that shows that all living things shares common ancestor, and it is through evolution that all of these differences arises to make what we see today how it is. And this is a process that happens over billions of years. So it is very hard for you to see evolution in action. Okay, so now we move on to our second type of evolution. So we have here the convergent evolution. So before I explain more about it, let's take a look at these three animals. So here we have sharks, dolphins, and puma. So who would you think share the recent common ancestors with dolphins, sharks, or puma? So now remember, ancestors are the species that two animals share before splitting into two different species. So let's have a guess. So now if you look at the features of these animals, it is not surprising for us to guess that dolphins and sharks shares recent common ancestor. They both live inside aquatic environments, and they both have similar features. They both have fins. They have similar tails. They have similar shape, similar body shapes. So it is not surprising, as I said earlier, for us to say that shark is more shares the recent common ancestors with dolphins. However, that is not the case. So dolphins, they actually share recent common ancestors with puma and are actually distantly related to sharks. Another way of seeing it is even us humans are more related to dolphin than a shark is. So convergent evolution is when animals share the same traits, but they are actually distantly related to one another. So dolphins and puma, they last share the recent common ancestor with shark when their ancestors split into the ancestors of mammals and the ancestors of fish. But dolphins and puma, they both have mammal traits. That's why they are more closely related to each other than shark is. So both dolphin and puma have a bony skeleton. They both breathe using lungs, and they both have mammary glands. But however, through natural selection, dolphins they develop traits that allows it to survive in aquatic environment. And these traits have also been developed in the distantly related sharks. This trait is similar because this trait is the most advantageous trait, the best trait to have if you are a species that live in aquatic environment such as the ocean that both the sharks and the dolphins live in. So another classic example of convergent evolution is between placental mammals and marsupials. So marsupials are a group of mammals that can be found in Australia and South America. They are a bit different as they give birth early and the baby develops outside their mothers. So in the marsupials group, you have the sugar gliders, and in the placental mammals, which is mammals like us, human, we have flying squirrels in our group. So both sugar gliders and flying squirrel, they both have an extra layer of tissue between their legs that allows them to glide from tree to tree to look for food. So they both look similar, but they are not actually closely related to one another. They are distantly related to one another. As we humans, we are placental mammals. We share a more recent common ancestor to flying squirrel than a flying squirrel is to a sugar glider. And this is just one example. There are a lot of other examples of convergent evolution between marsupials and placental mammals. So even though two species might look similar, they might be distantly related to one another. They develop the same trait because the good traits that they develop allows them to survive in the same type of environment, in similar environment. So that is our second type of evolution that we have learned today, convergent evolution, when two distantly related species become more and more like each other. So I have prepared a table here to summarize the differences between divergent and convergent evolution. So remember, divergent evolution is when one species actually separate into two separate species as they become less and less similar to one another. And an example of that is polar bears and brown bears. And convergent evolution, our second type, is when two species they look a lot like each other, but they are actually distantly related to one another, but they become more and more similar because the traits that they have developed is the most advantageous for their environment. And the example that we have learned today is the sharks and the dolphin, as well as the placental and the marsupial. And the example that we learned just now is the flying squirrel and the sugar glider. So that concludes the talk on evolution. So I hope that you get something out of this talk. But there are a few key messages that I would like to for you to remember when you get back home. Of course, you are already at home right now. But so the first thing is evolution is an answer. It is an answer on why everything is different and how some of the traits are the same. So, as we mentioned earlier, we have a lot of similarities with monkeys, but some of our traits are actually the same. So, evolution is the answer to this. And all of these differences in life forms is what we call as biodiversity. And the second message is that evolution is a process that happens over a long period of time. It takes billions of years to get to uh, how we are today. And this process of evolution is driven by natural selection. And natural selection is, as we have learned earlier, it's the selection of good traits and the elimination of bad traits. And we have also learned about the two types of evolution. We have learned about the divergent evolution, where one species separates into two or more species as they become less and less similar to one another. We have also learned about the convergent evolution, where two species looks a lot like each other, but they are actually distantly related to one another. So through natural selection and by being in the same environment, they develop the same traits that allows them to survive in this similar environment. So that concludes my talk on evolution. But I have something to share with all the audience today. So I've prepared this video for World Biodiversity Day. So I've prepared this video last year for World Biodiversity Day for MRS. We as Malaysian are very lucky because we live in a country that is so rich in biodiversity. So we have managed to capture some of them, and we would like to share it with you. So you can see this video in our YouTube channel as well, Malayan Reforestation. So see how much of the species you can identify, and maybe you can leave some comments in the comment section of our YouTube page. Uh, am I back now? So sorry about that. I'll try to share my screen back. Okay, so we're back now. Sorry about the disturbance. Okay, so I'll continue. So seeing all those videos, I hope that you can identify some of the species of the wonderful species of animals that we have here in Malaysia. So moving on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Malayan Rainforestation. So as Ali have said earlier, I am from Malayan Rainforestation. We are a we We are a non-governmental organization that works in Merapu Pahang. We are established for the past almost 2 years now. We established back in 2019. So we did research on wildlife and biodiversity in Merapu to provide data for stakeholders and decision makers so they could make better informed decisions regarding the environment. And we try to get the local communities involved in our research and conservation effort as well to make so that our effort is more sustainable when the local people take over. So as you can see in the slide, this is an aerial view of Merapu. So this is the beauty of Merapu is actually comes from the limestone caves. So it is surrounded by different forest reserve and taman negara, but the limestone is really the cherry on top of the cake. So Merapu is very important to our forest landscapes in Peninsular Malaysia. As you can see here, this is a map of Peninsular Malaysia. On the left side, you have the Titiwangsa Range. And on the right side, in number 2 here, you have the Taman Negara, Greater Taman Negara landscape. So Merapu is actually in the middle of these two large forest landscape. So in the smaller map here, we can see the dots here is actually the limestone caves. So the light green on the map is on the left is actually forest reserves that connects to the Titiwangsa Range, and on the right we have the Taman Negara. So separating these two large forest complex in Merapu is the Central Spine Road. So this road is a very important road that connects the east coast to the central part of Peninsular Malaysia. So in this road, they have created an elevated highway so that animal could move between these two forest body underneath the road, so they avoid getting hit by fast moving cars. Okay, getting ahead of myself there. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about the research that is currently ongoing in Merapu right now. So we have the Clouded Leopard project. So this is one of the research that I am heavily involved in. So cloud leopards are interesting animals, being one of the cat species that are very good climbers of the trees. So they move from canopies to canopies. We also did some research on flying squirrels. So the example that we give earlier for convergent evolution. So remember they have an extra layer of tissues between their legs that allows them to glide from trees to trees to find food. We also did some research on fruit bats. So bats are interesting creatures, being the only mammals that can fly. Currently, our flagship project is the rhinoceros hornbill. So we monitor the nesting behavior as well as we try to find hotspots for hornbills, like what different species of hornbills that we can find in Merapu, where we can find them, how many of them are there in Merapu. This will be beneficial for ecotourism in the future. For the nesting behavior, we observe the nesting behavior. So basically, when rhinoceros hornbills nest, the female will stay inside with the chick. So the male will bring food to the female and the chick until comes a time where the female will go out from the nest and they will both feed the chick. And sometimes when they feed the chick, the seeds that they bring will fall down. So we collect these seeds to identify what species of trees is it from. So from there, we strategize what kind of trees we're going to plant for our tree planting effort. So a little bit about me, the speaker. So my interest in wildlife actually comes from a very young age. Um, I remember when I was a kid, I have this book. It's a hard case book. It shows a map, world map. So it combines the two things that I like most: maps and animals. So in the maps, there are like different kind of animals in different part of the world. So it always excite me to know like you could go to different place and see a different kind of animals, and like for people there those animals are common, and for us it is like something exotic, and it is vice versa to them as well. So they'll come here to see, and like they'll see like long tail macaques, the kura, and say like, oh, something new, but we always see it, so it's nothing special to us. But yeah, the diversity of animals that we have in different part of the planet is very exciting to me. So I grew up in KL, in the suburban part of Chiras. Uh, we are not a wealthy family. We are like a middle class family. I went to school in KL, and I was fortunate enough to get into a boarding school when I was in Form 4. So there I forged connections from people from all around Malaysia, and this connection would prove fruitful for my journey in wildlife later on. So I did pretty good in I did pretty well in my SPM, and I managed to get a scholarship to pursue my study. So I studied biotechnology in Monash. So at this time, while earlier in my life I really like animals, but I didn't think of pursuing it as a career yet. So I just love animals, just love watching documentaries. But I really like biotech as well. So I pursued biotech, and after I graduated, I worked in a biopharmaceutical company for a while, for 3 years. So I worked in the drug manufacturing company. We manufacture insulin, which is what people take when they have diabetes. So starting the work, I developed a hobby. So this hobby is actually taking videos, taking pictures. So I first started with taking pictures of the natural landscapes, and then I reconnect with my friend from my high school, the boarding school that I mentioned earlier, and he is in wildlife conservation. So we went everywhere and to take pictures of animals, and that's where my passion for wildlife reignites. And then I finally quit my job and joined MRS. So in MRS and for my masters as well, what I'm doing is I am trying to find the diet of the clouded leopard, as we mentioned earlier. So I did this by DNA sequencing of scats. So scats is just a fancy way of saying poo, okay, the feces. So in the feces, you'll have these traces of DNA from the animals that left it. So remember DNA, the recipe to make you. So from by reading this recipe, we can also know that it is you that left this poo, and we can also know what you ate recently. So I go into Taman Negara and I try to collect all these scats. So this picture is in Taman Negara. It is in one of our sampling trip. So this picture here is a little bit special. We took this selfie because we managed to see something very rare in the forest, which is an Asiatic wild dog. So we were pretty excited by that time, and we took this selfie. So this is during the fecal sampling. So this is a video of me trying to record rhinoceros hornbills during the nesting. Okay, so I was trying to record the hornbills and the nest this time. So this is one of my role as well is in MRS. I document the work that we are doing and the animals that we are working on there. And sometimes I also fly drones. So this is in the okay. So video is taking quite a while to play. So maybe okay. So maybe you have seen earlier. There's like drone. We flew that drone to okay, here now. Okay, here. So we flew this drone to inspect the nest after the chick have 3 months after the chick have left the nest, just to see how the nest looks like and what is to estimate the height of the nest as well. And sometimes I flew. Sorry. Sometimes I flew higher up to see the environment surrounding the nesting tree. And I also am a part of this YouTube channel, Wildlife Malaysia. So Wildlife Malaysia is a little bit different from what we do in MRS. So it's just a YouTube channel where we share information regarding wildlife. And the medium that we use for this channel is in layman's Bahasa Malaysia to spread more knowledge about uh, wildlife in Malaysia. Because it is quite surprising how little us Malaysian knows about our own wildlife. So that concludes the talk by me today. So if you are interested in MRS or the work that we are doing, you can reach out to us through our social media pages as well as our website. So thank you all for being here today, and I would like to thank Ailey and PSC for inviting me to do the talk. So I'll just pass it over to Ailey now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the talk, Hafiz. Um, I don't know if you notice it, but there's actually a chat going on with our viewers actually saying what their favorite animals are, and some of them,
Ah, okay.
yes, some of them actually mentioned the fruit bat when you were showing the fruit bat just now, and some of them
Ah, okay.
mentioned the hornbills.
It is very
So
cute
of
though.
course, yes, and of course I mentioned powdered leopard because I did mention how you actually just mentioned to me a couple weeks ago that clouded leopards can climb, and I didn't know that before. And I thought I know a lot of about nature, but
Ah,
there's always something new to learn. Yeah, so thank you for the talk,
yeah.
boys and girls. Those of you guys who are listening, I hope you guys learn new stuff about evolution. I know you do cover a little bit of this as part of your syllabus. I know you learn about naming and classification. So I hope this helps you learn a little bit better in school as well. And you can always come back and view this video again if you want to remember some of the things that you've already heard before. And just like what we have on our slide right now, remember that you can participate in a quiz that is related to today's talk if you want. And if you do, you stand to win some prizes along the way as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you. I just want to give a shout out to those who actually chat with us together while we are going live right now. Thank you, Wenshun. Thank you, Nuha. Thank you, Wei En. Yeah, thank you guys for joining us and Adip as well. So, Adip is probably Hafiz's friend. So, anyway, thank you guys
Yes.
for joining us. Remember to join the quiz. The quiz will open on 30th of September and it will only be open for 24 hours. So, make sure you guys chop, chop, chop and complete the quiz so that you guys can win the prize. Thank you again, all, and we will see you in the next session, which will probably be during virtual PISF, virtual Penang International Science Fair, which is going to be in November this year. So see you then. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.